My name is Harper, and I am 29 years old. 2 weeks ago, my own parents slipped a sleeping pill into my coffee so I would sleep through the most important job interview of my life. They did it because my sister wanted the same executive position, and they knew I was the only person standing in her way. I woke up 14 hours late, my custom presentation materials stolen, my career seemingly ruined. But my sister didn't get the job. She failed because the CEO of the company checked the lobby security cameras and watched my father hand a receptionist a thick envelope of cash to feed my resume into an industrial shredder. Before I tell you what happened when the CEO showed me that footage, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments so I know who is listening. Now, let me take you back to the weeks leading up to that interview and the invisible war raging inside my family home. If you looked at us from the outside, we were the picture of American success. A sprawling brick house in the Chicago suburbs, imported cars in the driveway, and a membership at the local country club. But inside those walls, there was a strict, unspoken hierarchy. My younger sister Vanessa was the golden child. She was the master of failing upwards, armed with a communications degree my parents bought for her and a smile designed to manipulate anyone in her path. I was the grinder. I was the one who worked 80-hour weeks to become a top-tier marketing director. I earned every promotion, every raise, and every ounce of respect the hard way. 2 weeks ago, Vanguard Innovations, a ruthless Silicon Valley tech firm, announced they were opening a Chicago headquarters. They posted a listing for a vice president of marketing. The salary was mid-six figures, plus generous stock options. It was the job of a lifetime. I spent weeks preparing a brilliant, data-driven portfolio. I audited their previous campaigns and built a predictive model for their next quarter. Vanessa was currently unemployed after getting fired from her last agency for culture fit issues. She saw my preparation and decided she wanted the job too. She lacked the experience and the work ethic, but she had our father, Richard. He pulled strings with his golfing buddies to secure her an initial screening. Against all odds, the grueling interview process whittled a pool of hundreds down to just two final candidates, me and Vanessa. The final panel was scheduled for a Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. The stage was set, but only one of us was willing to play fair. The drive to my parents' house in the Chicago suburbs usually takes 40 minutes. That Tuesday evening, the night before my final interview with Vanguard Innovations, the traffic on the Kennedy Expressway stretched the commute to over an hour. The delay gave me too much time to think. My phone sat in the passenger seat, displaying a text message from my mother, Diane. It read, "We are so proud of both our girls. Come over for a Truce dinner tonight. No competition, just family celebrating success." The word truce felt unnatural. In the unspoken rule book of our family, truces did not exist. There was only winning, and whoever won received my father's validation. But a small, naive part of me, the part that still wanted parents who celebrated my grueling 80-hour work weeks, decided to go. I pulled my car into the wide, circular driveway. The house was an imposing brick colonial, framed by manicured hedges and glowing landscape lights. It projected an image of flawless suburban stability. I unlocked the heavy oak front door and stepped into the foyer. The air smelled of roasted rosemary and expensive linen candles. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a pristine apron. She wore her signature pearls and a tight, practiced smile. She pulled me into a brief embrace that felt more like a requirement than a greeting. "You look exhausted, Harper," she noted, her eyes sweeping over my tailored work suit. "You really push yourself too hard." Vanessa is already in the dining room, looking remarkably refreshed. The subtle sting of the comparison was routine. I walked into the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was set with the family sterling silver and crystal wine glasses. Vanessa sat near the head of the table, scrolling through her phone. She wore a silk designer blouse that I knew cost more than my first car, purchased undoubtedly with my father's credit card. When she looked up, her eyes gleamed with a strange, manic anticipation that put my nerves on high alert. "Harper," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I am so glad you came. Dad is opening the good Cabernet." My father, Richard, strode into the room holding an expensive bottle of wine. He wore his cashmere sweater and the relaxed confidence of a man who always controlled the narrative in the room. He poured the red wine into our glasses and took his seat at the head of the table. My mother brought out the serving dishes, and for the first 20 minutes, the conversation mimicked a normal, loving family. We talked about the mild autumn weather and my mother's upcoming charity gala, but the tension hovering above the porcelain plates was suffocating. As my father carved the roasted chicken, he cleared his throat. The shift in his demeanor was immediate. The paternal warmth vanished, replaced by the calculating gaze he usually reserved for his corporate boardroom. "So, girls," he began, passing a plate to Vanessa, "tomorrow is the big day. Vanguard Innovations, 9 o'clock in the morning. I want to clear the air tonight. Regardless of who Julian Sterling chooses for the vice president role, this family remains united." Vanessa took a sip of her wine and smiled across the table at me. "Exactly," she agreed. "May the best woman win." Though I do have to admit, Harper, I am a little nervous about the technical questions. What kind of metrics do you think they will ask us to project for the third quarter? I paused, my fork hovering over my plate. The trap was so obvious it was almost insulting. Vanessa did not understand the data. She had spent her previous jobs delegating the actual labor to underpaid assistants while she networked at expensive lunches. Vanguard Innovations required a rigorous, mathematical approach to market capture. She was trying to mine my expertise to survive her final panel. I kept my expression neutral. "Vanguard values proprietary strategy, Vanessa. I am sure they will want to see your unique perspective on customer acquisition. I cannot predict their exact questions, but relying on your own marketing blueprint is the best approach." The dining room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. My sister's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing as she realized I was not going to hand her the answers. She looked quickly toward my father, a silent plea for intervention. Richard set his wineglass down with a sharp thud. "Come now, Harper," he said, his tone carrying a hard edge. "Your sister is just asking for a little guidance. You have always been so rigid with your work. Family helps family. That is the point of this dinner." I met his gaze evenly. "I spent 3 weeks building my portfolio, Dad. I audited Vanguard's entire operational history. I am not going to jeopardize my interview by sharing my intellectual property the night before we both walk into the same room. I earned my place at that table." My mother let out a heavy, disappointed sigh. "Always so difficult," she murmured, reaching for her water glass. "We just want peace, Harper. Why must you turn everything into a battle?" "Because it is a battle, Mom," I replied, my voice steady. "It is a mid-six-figure executive position. It is not a country club tennis match." The temperature in the room dropped. My father stared at me, his jaw clenched. I saw the exact moment the calculation in his eyes shifted. He realized I was not going to step aside. He realized my portfolio was impenetrable, and that against my preparation, Vanessa did not stand a chance. He looked at my sister, then back at me, and his rigid posture suddenly relaxed. He let out a smooth, practiced chuckle that sent a shiver down my spine. "You are right, Harper," my father said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "You are absolutely right. I apologize. Business is business. Let us leave the shop talk at the door and just enjoy the meal." The rest of the dinner passed in an eerie, manufactured calm. Vanessa stopped asking questions. My mother steered the conversation toward neutral topics. I let my guard drop just a fraction, relieved that the confrontation had passed without a shouting match. I finished my meal, eager to return to my apartment and run through my presentation one final time. When my mother began clearing the plates, my father stood up. "Let me make the coffee," he offered brightly. I picked up those imported espresso beans from the boutique roaster downtown. We all need a little boost to digest. My father took immense pride in his elaborate Italian espresso machine. It was a fixture of his evening routine. I watched him walk into the kitchen. I could hear the grinding of the beans, the hiss of the steam wand, the clatter of ceramic mugs. 5 minutes later, he returned to the dining room carrying a silver tray with 3 steaming cups of dark espresso. He handed the first cup to my mother, the second to Vanessa, and placed the final cup directly in front of me. "Drink up, Harper," he said, his voice lowering to a soft paternal rhythm, "to keep you sharp for tomorrow." I picked up the mug. The porcelain was warm against my hands. I took a generous sip. The coffee was rich, dark, and carried a faint, bitter, metallic aftertaste that I attributed to the new roast. I swallowed it, setting the mug back onto the saucer. Across the table, Vanessa had not touched her drink. She was staring at me, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the mahogany table, her breathing shallow and fast. I glanced at the antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room. It read 8:45. "I need to head home," I announced, pushing my chair back. "I want to be in bed by 10. I tried to stand, but my legs felt wrong. A sudden, terrifying heaviness settled into my bones, as if gravity in the dining room had just doubled. My knees buckled slightly, and I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. The wood felt strange beneath my fingers, distant and numb. "Harper?" my mother asked. Her voice sounded warped, echoing as if she were speaking to me from underwater. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the edges of the room began to blur and smear. The crystal chandelier overhead fractured into a dozen glowing, spinning lights. A thick, suffocating fog rolled over my brain, shutting down my cognitive functions one by one. Panic flared in my chest, a desperate primal alarm screaming that something was terribly wrong. I looked at my father. He was standing near the doorway, watching me with a clinical, detached expression. He did not look worried. He looked like a man waiting for a timer to go off. "Dad," I managed to whisper, but my tongue felt thick and useless. The words slurred together. Something is wrong. The strength vanished from my arms. My grip on the table failed. I collapsed sideways, my shoulder hitting the floor hard, before my head rested against the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. The impact barely registered through the heavy chemical blanket pulling me under. I could only move my eyes. Through the narrowing tunnel of my vision, I saw my mother calmly walk over to my seat. She did not kneel beside me. She did not scream for an ambulance. She reached down and picked up my empty coffee mug, placing it carefully onto her serving tray. Vanessa stepped into my line of sight. She stood over me, looking down at my paralyzed body. The smug, triumphant smirk on her face was the clearest thing in the room. The darkness crept in from the corners, swallowing the light. As my eyes fluttered shut, unable to fight the synthetic sleep dragging me down, I heard my father's dress shoes step close to my head. He leaned over, and his final words echoed in the fading silence of my mind. "It is for the best, Harper. Your sister needs this more than you do." I woke up gasping for air, my lungs seized, pulling in jagged breaths as if I had been submerged underwater for an eternity. The room was spinning, a sickening carousel of muted colors and blurred edges. A thick chemical fog blanketed my brain, making every thought feel like it was moving through wet cement. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to anchor myself to reality. The surface beneath me was soft. I was lying in my own bed, wearing the tailored worksuit from the previous evening. My blazer was wrinkled, twisting uncomfortably around my shoulders. One of my heels had fallen to the floor. How did I get back to my apartment? The last memory I had was the intricate pattern of my parents' Persian rug pressing against my cheek. I remembered the heavy, bitter taste of the espresso my father insisted I drink. I remembered the sudden, terrifying loss of muscle control. They must have carried me out to a car and driven me home while I was unconscious. They dumped me in my own bed like a discarded piece of furniture. I forced my eyes open again. A harsh, bright light was slicing through the gap in my bedroom blinds. It was not the soft, pale illumination of early morning. It was the deep, golden glare of late afternoon. My heart executed a painful stutter in my chest. I fumbled across the nightstand, my fingers clumsy and numb. I knocked over a glass of water, the liquid spilling across the wood, before my hand found my phone. The screen illuminated, burning my sensitive eyes. I squinted at the digital display. The numbers read 4:15 p.m. My breath caught in my throat. Wednesday afternoon. My final panel interview with Julian Sterling at Vanguard Innovations had been scheduled for 9 o'clock this morning. I stared at the screen, waiting for the numbers to change, waiting for the digital clock to reveal this was some sort of cruel hallucination induced by whatever pharmaceutical compound my father had slipped into my cup. The numbers remained fixed. 4:16 p.m. I had slept for more than 14 hours. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through my nervous system, instantly burning through the residual lethargy of the sedative. I scrambled out of bed. My legs tangled in the duvet, and I hit the hardwood floor hard, scraping my knee. I ignored the sting. I pushed myself up, my mind racing through a chaotic sequence of damage control. I had missed the most important meeting of my professional life. I was marked as a no-show for an executive role that required flawless reliability. I stumbled out of the bedroom and into the kitchen. My leather work tote was sitting on the granite island. I always packed it the night before a major presentation. It was a ritual of preparedness. The bag should have been heavy, pregnant with the weight of my hard work. I grabbed the handles. The leather felt too light. I tore the main zipper open. The interior compartments had been pillaged. The custom-bound portfolio, the physical manifestation of 3 weeks of grueling analytical research, was gone. The thick, ivory cardstock pages detailing my predictive market models, the comprehensive demographic breakdowns, the proprietary launch strategies I had designed from scratch, all missing. I clawed through the side pockets, my breathing turning shallow and erratic. The silver USB drive containing my digital slide decks and the backup files for my presentation, missing. The folder containing 10 crisp, printed copies of my resume on premium paper, missing. They had gutted my bag. They did not just incapacitate me to ensure I missed the scheduled interview time. They systematically disarmed me. They removed every piece of physical evidence that proved my competence, ensuring that even if I had woken up on time, I would have walked into the Vanguard boardroom empty-handed and unprepared. I dumped the remaining contents of the tote onto the counter. A few stray pens, a pack of gum, a loose tube of lipstick clattered against the stone. My laptop was still nestled in its padded sleeve. I yanked it out and flipped the screen open. I bypassed the login screen and opened my primary work directory. The specific desktop folder labeled Vanguard Audit was nowhere to be found. I checked the trash bin. Empty. Whoever unpacked my bag had also possessed the technical foresight to wipe the local files from my hard drive. My father knew my password. He had set up this laptop for me 2 years ago as a birthday gift. The irony tasted like ash in my mouth. My hands trembled fiercely as I picked up my phone. I needed to hear their voices. I needed to hear the lie they had prepared. I dialed my father. The line rang 3 times before clicking over to his polished, professional voicemail greeting. "You have reached Richard. Please leave a detailed message, and I will return your call at my earliest convenience." I ended the call without speaking. I dialed my mother. The automated voice informed me that the recipient was currently unavailable. I lowered the phone. The profound silence of my apartment pressed against my eardrums. They were ignoring my calls on purpose. They knew exactly what time the sedative would wear off, and they were actively choosing to remain unreachable. They were avoiding the fallout of their own treachery. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the cool stone pressing through the thin fabric of my wrinkled blouse. The events of the previous evening replayed in my mind with horrifying clarity. The fabricated Truce dinner, the sudden shift in my father's demeanor when I refused to share my proprietary metrics with Vanessa, the calculating look in his eyes right before he offered to make the coffee. He had retreated to the kitchen, away from our sight, to prepare the espresso. He had handed me the cup with a soft paternal rhythm in his voice, "To keep you sharp for tomorrow." Then I remembered the moment my body began to fail. I remembered my mother walking toward me as I collapsed. She did not check my pulse. She did not cry out in alarm. She simply retrieved the evidence, picking up the empty mug to wash away the chemical residue. And Vanessa. Vanessa had stood over my paralyzed body, wearing a smug, triumphant smirk that confirmed her complicity in the entire operation. This was not a crime of passion. This was a premeditated assassination of my career, orchestrated by the people who shared my blood. They had weighed my future against my sister's entitlement, and they had chosen to eliminate me. They decided that my grueling 80-hour work weeks, my sacrifices, and my intellect were merely obstacles blocking Vanessa's path to unearned success. The panic that had gripped my chest slowly began to recede, evaporating under the intense heat of a profound, defining anger. The remnants of the drug burned away, leaving my mind sharp and unnervingly clear. Most people would have collapsed onto the floor weeping. They would have mourned the loss of the opportunity and the betrayal of their family. I did not shed a single tear. Crying required a vulnerability I was no longer willing to offer them. I stood up straight, smoothing the wrinkles from my blazer. I looked at the empty leather tote on the counter. They thought they had erased me. They thought that without my printed charts and my digital slides, I was nothing. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my success. The portfolio was just paper. The strategy, the metrics, the predictive models, those lived inside my head. They could not delete my intellect. I began to pace the length of my hardwood floor, analyzing the battlefield. It was approaching 5 o'clock in the evening. The corporate day was winding down. Julian Sterling and the Vanguard executive team were likely concluding their evaluations. Vanessa had spent the morning presenting her case, undoubtedly attempting to leverage whatever charm she possessed to secure the position. But Vanessa did not know the data. She could not speak to the analytics because she had never done the work. I stopped pacing. A quiet resolve settled over me. I did not have my presentation materials, but I had my voice. I had the truth. And I was not going to let a chemically induced blackout dictate the trajectory of my life. I was going to walk into the Vanguard Innovations headquarters, and I was going to demand an audience. I turned toward the hallway closet to grab my trench coat. Just as my hand wrapped around the brass handle, I heard the distinct metallic scrape of a key sliding into the front door lock. The deadbolt turned with a heavy click. I froze, my grip tightening on the closet handle. Only one other person had a key to this apartment, the sister who lived with me rent-free, the sister who had spent the morning interviewing for the job I had earned, the sister who watched me collapse on a dining room floor and smiled. The heavy oak door swung open, and the silence of my apartment was about to be broken. The heavy oak door swung inward, hitting the rubber wall stop with a dull thud. Vanessa stepped over the threshold, bringing a gust of chilly autumn air and the cloying scent of her signature designer perfume into my living room. She did not look like a woman who had just survived a grueling 3-hour executive interview panel. She looked like someone returning from a victorious shopping spree. 3 glossy retail bags swung from her wrists. She kicked off her heels, letting them clatter against the hardwood, and tossed her keys onto the granite kitchen island, right next to my gutted leather work tote. She was wearing a tailored ivory pantsuit that fit her flawlessly. It was an outfit chosen to project authority, but the woman wearing it lacked the substance to back it up. She finally turned her head and noticed me standing near the hallway. A fleeting shadow of surprise crossed her features, quickly replaced by a radiant, manufactured smile. "Oh, you are finally awake," she chirped, her voice light and breezy. "Mom texted me this morning. She said you caught a terrible stomach bug overnight and decided to sleep it off. Such a shame about Vanguard, Harper. I know how much you wanted to practice your little charts today." Her performance was chilling. She delivered the lie with the effortless grace of someone who had never faced a consequence in her 27 years on this earth. She walked over to the refrigerator, opened the stainless steel door, and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. She twisted the cap off and took a delicate sip, watching me over the rim of the glass bottle. I did not yell. I did not throw the empty leather tote at her head. I simply watched her, dissecting the layers of her deception. Growing up, Vanessa had always been a sanctioned pirate. If I won a science fair, my parents bought her a better trophy, just to ensure she felt special. If I saved my allowance for a specific sweater, she would borrow it without asking and ruin it, knowing my mother would simply replace it for her. This was the same dynamic, scaled up to a corporate magnitude. She truly believed she was entitled to my career because our father had convinced her she was the center of the universe. "You seem in high spirits," I noted, keeping my voice dangerously level. "I assume the panel went well?" Vanessa leaned against the counter, crossing her ankles. She practically vibrated with an unearned, triumphant energy. "It was incredible," she gushed, gesturing with her free hand. "The Vanguard headquarters are stunning. All floor-to-ceiling glass and raw steel. They even have an in-house barista." The interviewers were so receptive. We totally connected on a visionary level. Julian Sterling is intense, of course, but I think he really appreciated my fresh perspective on brand synergy. Brand synergy. It was a meaningless corporate buzzword, the kind of fluff you throw into a conversation when you lack hard data. Vanguard Innovations was a data-driven machine. Julian Sterling was notorious for devouring executives who lacked quantitative substance. "What did Julian think of the predictive customer acquisition models?" I asked softly, taking a step closer to the kitchen island. "How did you explain the algorithmic retention strategies for the third quarter?" Vanessa blinked. Her polished smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she smoothed it back into place. "Oh, we did not get bogged down in the tedious spreadsheet stuff," she waved her hand dismissively. "I focused on the overarching narrative." Julian loved my big-picture energy. He said my presentation style was very compelling. I stared at her. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me, crystallizing the anger into something far more dangerous. She had no idea what she was talking about. She had stolen my physical portfolio and my digital slide decks, but she lacked the fundamental intellect to interpret the data I had compiled. She had walked into a boardroom with a shark like Julian Sterling and tried to charm her way through a rigorous analytical audit. I looked down at the empty leather tote resting between us on the granite counter. Then I looked back into her eyes. "Where is my portfolio, Vanessa?" Her posture stiffened. She set the bottle of sparkling water down. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Harper. You must be delirious from being sick all day." "You did not write a presentation," I stated, my voice dropping to a low, authoritative register. "You spent the last 3 weeks complaining about being unemployed while I stayed up until 2 in the morning building a comprehensive market strategy. You drugged my coffee. You and Dad packed my body into a car, brought me back here, and you gutted my bag." Vanessa crossed her arms, adopting a defensive, wounded posture. "You always do this, Harper. You always invent these crazy conspiracy theories whenever I succeed at something. You cannot stand the thought that I might actually be better at networking than you. I earned my spot in that boardroom today. You were just too weak to show up." The sheer audacity of her delusion was breathtaking. She had wrapped herself in a blanket of lies woven by our parents, and she was genuinely offended that I dared to pull the thread. Arguing with her was a pointless endeavor. She would deny the theft until her dying breath, because admitting it would fracture the fragile, manufactured reality where she was the brilliant, successful daughter. I realized then that my battle was not in this apartment. The battle was not with Vanessa, or my mother, or my father. They operated in a closed system where the truth was whatever my father decided it was. I needed to strike where their influence held no weight. I needed to step into the real world, the ruthless meritocracy of Vanguard Innovations, where data and competence were the only currencies that mattered. I turned away from her and walked to the hallway closet. I pulled my tailored trench coat off the hanger. "What are you doing?" Vanessa asked, a sudden edge of uncertainty creeping into her voice. She stepped away from the kitchen counter, watching me slip my arms into the sleeves of the coat. "The corporate day is over, Harper. It is nearly 5:30. Everyone has gone home. The interviews are closed." I fastened the belt around my waist and picked up my keys from the console table. I turned to face my sister one last time. "You made a fundamental miscalculation, Vanessa," I said, my tone carrying the quiet weight of a judge delivering a sentence. You stole paper. You stole an ivory cardstock binder and a silver USB drive. You thought the magic was in the ink, but you cannot steal my mind. You cannot memorize an algorithm you do not understand, and you cannot charm your way past a CEO who demands results. Her face paled slightly. The smug confidence began to crack, revealing the terrified, insecure girl hiding beneath the designer suit. She opened her mouth to argue, to deploy another familiar gaslighting tactic, but I did not give her the chance. I opened the front door and stepped out into the hallway. I did not slam the door behind me. I pulled it shut with a firm, decisive click, sealing her inside the apartment with her stolen shopping bags and her hollow victory. I walked down the corridor to the elevator, my strides long and purposeful. The residual fog from the sedative had entirely burned away, replaced by a crystalline focus. I rode the elevator down to the underground parking garage and got into my car. The engine roared to life, a steady, mechanical heartbeat matching the pulse thrumming in my own veins. I pulled out of the garage and merged onto the bustling Chicago streets. The autumn evening was setting in, casting long, dramatic shadows across the pavement. The streetlights flickered on, illuminating the path toward the downtown financial district. The traffic was dense, a river of red taillights bleeding into the horizon, but I navigated through the congestion with predatory precision. I did not have an appointment. I did not have a security clearance badge. I did not have my printed resumes or my glossy charts. I was driving toward a corporate fortress guarded by receptionists, security personnel, and layers of bureaucratic red tape. Walking into Vanguard Innovations at this hour and demanding an audience with the chief executive officer was a reckless, nearly impossible gamble. But I knew one indisputable fact. Julian Sterling was a man who optimized every second of his day. He was a man who despised inefficiency and punished incompetence. If Vanessa had stood in his boardroom and attempted to bluff her way through my proprietary data, she had not charmed him. She had insulted his intelligence. He would be sitting in his corner office, wondering why the brilliant analyst from the preliminary rounds had failed to show up, leaving him with an underprepared imposter. I gripped the leather steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. My father thought he had bought my failure. My sister thought she had stolen my future. They had played their hand, relying on my historical tendency to suffer in silence and absorb their abuse for the sake of family peace. They were about to discover that the quiet, obedient daughter they thought they knew had died on that dining room floor. The woman driving downtown was someone else entirely. She was a professional who knew her exact market value, and she was coming to collect. I spotted the towering glass and steel monolith of the Vanguard headquarters rising against the darkening sky. The building pierced the clouds, a monument to ambition and ruthless efficiency. I pulled my car into the adjacent parking structure and cut the engine. I took one deep, steadying breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. It was time to introduce Julian Sterling to the real Harper. The revolving glass doors of the Vanguard Innovations headquarters acted as a vacuum, sucking away the chaotic noise of the downtown Chicago rush hour and replacing it with a pristine, climate-controlled silence. I stepped into the lobby and immediately understood the architectural intent. The space was designed to make you feel small. The ceilings stretched 3 stories high, supported by angular pillars of raw steel. The floor was a seamless expanse of dark, polished slate that mirrored my reflection with every step I took. There was no warmth here, no inviting artwork or plush seating areas. It was an environment engineered for efficiency and intimidation. I pulled the belt of my trench coat tighter, feeling the stark contrast between my current reality and the polished executive image I had intended to project 12 hours earlier. I did not have my custom leather binder. I did not have my digital slides. I had nothing but the residual metallic taste of my father's sedative in the back of my throat and a cold, singular focus driving me forward. At the far end of the cavernous room sat the reception desk, a long, curved slab of white marble that looked more like a judge's bench than a greeting station. Behind it sat a young woman bathed in the blue glow of dual computer monitors. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, tight bun, an attempt to project corporate authority that clashed with the anxious, youthful energy radiating from her posture. She was glancing at the digital clock on the wall, her shoulders relaxing incrementally as the minutes ticked closer to the end of her shift. I walked across the slate floor. The sharp click of my heels echoed through the acoustic dead zone of the lobby, announcing my approach. The receptionist looked up, her fingers pausing over her keyboard. She offered a practiced, hollow smile designed to quickly process and dismiss unexpected visitors. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but laced with the underlying assumption that I did not belong there. The corporate day is wrapping up, and most of our executive teams have already left the building. I stopped directly in front of the marble desk. I did not return her smile. "My name is Harper," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "I had a 9 o'clock interview this morning for the Vice President of Marketing position. I need to speak with the hiring manager, or whoever is running the executive search, immediately." The reaction was instantaneous and entirely disproportionate to my request. The practiced corporate smile did not simply fade, it shattered. All the color drained from the receptionist's face, leaving her skin a pale, ashen gray. Her eyes darted from my face to her computer screen, then back to my face, wide with a sudden, naked panic. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing, and her hands began to tremble above her keyboard. I watched her closely, my analytical mind shifting into high gear. A normal gatekeeper at a Fortune 500 company deals with irate clients, lost vendors, and confused job seekers on a daily basis. They respond with mild annoyance or practiced bureaucratic deflection. They do not respond with sheer, unadulterated terror. "I am sorry," she stammered, her voice dropping an octave, losing all of its previous professional gloss. "You are not in the system. The final panel concluded hours ago. The executive team is done for the day. You need to leave." She did not ask me to leave. She pleaded with me to leave. Her eyes kept darting toward the bank of silver elevators to my right, as if she expected a monster to step out of them at any second. "Check the system again," I instructed, leaning forward slightly. "Harper, candidate for the VP of Marketing." I was one of the final two. "I do not need to check the system," she whispered frantically, her hands dropping into her lap to hide their shaking. "You were marked as a no-show. The position is closed. If you do not exit the building right now, I will have to call security." She was lying. Or rather, she was reciting a script she had been paid to deliver, but she lacked the nerve to execute it under pressure. I placed both of my hands flat on the cold marble surface of her desk, invading her safe space, forcing her to hold my gaze. "I am not leaving this lobby until I speak to someone in authority," I said. My tone was no longer a request. It was an immovable fact. The receptionist let out a sharp, panicked breath. She reached for the black desk phone, her trembling fingers fumbling with the receiver. She punched in a 3-digit code, bringing the phone close to her mouth, her eyes fixed on me like a trapped animal. "Security," she hissed into the receiver, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. "I need a removal in the main lobby, front desk." She slammed the phone down and shrank back into her ergonomic chair. I did not flinch. I turned my head slowly, scanning the perimeter of the vast room. From the shadows near the secondary exit doors, 2 men in tailored dark gray suits stepped forward. They did not wear the cheap uniforms of rent-a-cops. They moved with the silent, predatory grace of highly trained private security personnel. Their faces were carved from stone, their eyes locked onto me as they closed the distance across the slate floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rapid, frantic rhythm demanding that I turn and run. The humiliation of being physically dragged out of the Vanguard Innovations headquarters would be a fatal blow to my career. It would be a permanent black mark, a story passed around the Chicago corporate circuit for years. But I anchored my feet to the floor. I thought of my sister, sitting in my apartment with her designer shopping bags, basking in the glow of a victory she had stolen. I thought of my father, pouring that dark espresso with a false smile. I would not let them win. I would stand in this lobby until they threw me onto the sidewalk. "Ma'am," the lead security guard said. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his voice was a deep, resonant rumble that offered no room for negotiation. "You are trespassing on private property. We are going to escort you to the exit. Please do not make this difficult." He reached out, his thick hand inches away from gripping the fabric of my trench coat. I squared my shoulders, preparing for the physical impact, preparing to state my name and my purpose loud enough for anyone in the adjacent glass offices to hear. "That won't be necessary." The voice cut through the tense air of the lobby like a straight razor. It was not loud, but it possessed a specific, cutting frequency that demanded absolute obedience. It echoed off the marble walls and the steel pillars, freezing the two security guards instantly in their tracks. The lead guard dropped his hand, taking a swift, disciplined step backward. The receptionist behind the desk let out a quiet, terrified gasp, pressing her hands over her mouth. I turned toward the bank of silver elevators. Standing there was Julian Sterling, the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Innovations. He was a man whose reputation preceded him across every financial district in the country. Known for tearing apart bloated corporations and rebuilding them into lean, profitable machines, he possessed an aura of quiet, dangerous intellect. He wore a midnight blue suit without a tie, the collar of his crisp white shirt unbuttoned, projecting an image of effortless authority. He did not look like a man who was wrapping up a long day. He looked like a man who had been waiting for something to happen. His dark, piercing eyes locked onto mine, analyzing me in a fraction of a second, stripping away the wrinkled trench coat and the disheveled appearance to weigh the substance underneath. "You are Harper," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a chilling certainty. I stood my ground, refusing to let the intimidation of his presence break my composure. I met his dark gaze with equal intensity. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through my veins. "I missed my 9 o'clock appointment." Julian took a slow, deliberate step forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound against the slate floor. He stopped a few feet away from me, crossing his arms over his chest. He did not ask for an excuse, he simply waited for the explanation. "I was incapacitated against my will late last night," I stated, the words sharp and precise. "My custom presentation portfolio, my digital slide decks, and my resumes were stolen from my personal bag. I do not expect special treatment, Mr. Sterling, but I earned my place in your boardroom today, and I am here to explain the discrepancy." I expected him to laugh. I expected him to dismiss me as a disgruntled, unstable candidate, making wild, dramatic excuses for a failure of time management. I expected him to nod to the security guards and have me removed from his sight. Instead, a slow, predatory smile spread across Julian Sterling's face. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the smile of an apex predator that had just found a missing piece to a highly complex puzzle. The tension in the lobby shifted, the dynamic instantly altering from a hostile removal to something deeply fascinating. Julian waved his hand without breaking eye contact with me. The two security guards immediately turned and melted back into the shadows, disappearing as silently as they had arrived. The receptionist behind the desk remained frozen, her eyes wide with dread, refusing to look at her boss. Julian gestured toward the open doors of the private executive elevator behind him. "Come up to my office, Harper," he commanded softly. He turned and walked into the chrome interior of the elevator cab. I did not hesitate. I walked past the trembling receptionist, stepping into the small, confined space with the CEO. The heavy silver doors slid shut, sealing us in a sudden, quiet intimacy. The elevator began its rapid ascent toward the top floor. Julian stood beside me, watching the floor numbers climb on the digital display. The anger and panic that had fueled my drive downtown were replaced by a cold, sharp anticipation. "Your sister did not get the job, Harper," Julian said quietly, his voice filling the small space. But you and I need to look at something very interesting. The chrome elevator doors parted silently. Stepping out onto the top floor of Vanguard Innovations felt like entering a different atmosphere. The air was thinner here, charged with the electric hum of high-stakes commerce. Julian Sterling did not pause to see if I was following. He moved with the fluid, predatory stride of a man accustomed to leading. I shadowed him down a short corridor paneled in dark acoustic wood, our footsteps muffled by thick, slate-colored carpet. He opened a heavy set of double doors, gesturing for me to enter his private domain. The corner suite was a masterclass in modern corporate warfare. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic, dizzying view of the Chicago skyline, a sea of glittering lights stretching out toward the ink-black expanse of Lake Michigan. There was no clutter. No personal photographs or sentimental trinkets adorned the vast black walnut desk dominating the center of the room. It was a space designed solely for executing power. Julian did not take a seat behind his desk. He walked past it, heading straight toward the far wall, which appeared to be a seamless panel of frosted glass. He pressed his thumb against a discrete biometric scanner embedded in the wall framing. The glass instantly transitioned from opaque to transparent, revealing a high-definition monitor that spanned nearly the entire width of the room. I stood near the center of the office, keeping my posture rigid, refusing to let the intimidation of the environment seep into my bones. The sedative still lingered like a phantom weight behind my eyes, but the adrenaline burned hotter. "You said my sister did not get the job," I stated, breaking the silence as the screen flickered to life. "I need to know why you brought me up here instead of having me thrown out for trespassing." Julian typed a rapid sequence of commands onto a wireless keyboard resting on a nearby console. "I pride myself on knowing every single variable that operates inside this building, Harper," he replied, his back still turned to me. "When a top-tier candidate vanishes hours before a final panel, leaving us with an imposter, I do not accept coincidences. I demand data." He hit the enter key with a sharp, definitive strike. I turned around to face the screen. The monitor divided into a grid of 4 separate camera angles, all focused on the ground floor lobby I had just occupied. The timestamp in the lower right corner read 8:15 in the morning. The morning traffic of suits and briefcases flowed through the revolving doors, a silent, time-lapsed river of corporate ambition. Then, the camera in the upper left quadrant zoomed in on the reception desk. My breath hitched, a sharp, involuntary intake of air that scraped the back of my throat. Walking into the frame, dressed in his tailored charcoal suit and carrying his signature Italian leather briefcase, was my father, Richard. He approached the marble desk with the casual, entitled stride of a man who believed the world owed him deference. He leaned against the counter, flashing the young receptionist the same practiced paternal smile he had used on me the night before, while handing me a drugged cup of espresso. The receptionist looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before leaning in to hear whatever lie he was spinning. I watched the black and white footage in horrified fascination, my nails digging into the soft leather of my trench coat pockets. The betrayal was no longer an abstract theory I had pieced together in my apartment. It was a documented, irrefutable reality playing out in high definition. My father reached into the interior pocket of his suit jacket. He withdrew a thick, unmarked white envelope. Even on a security feed, the distinct rectangular bulge of banded currency was unmistakable. He slid it across the smooth marble surface, pushing it directly under the receptionist's hand. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, a moral calculation playing out in her posture, before her fingers closed around the paper. She swept the envelope off the counter, burying it inside her suit jacket. Julian's voice was a low, dangerous murmur beside me. $5,000, he translated, narrating the silent exchange. A calculated investment to purchase your absence. But my father was not finished. He placed his briefcase on the counter and popped the brass latches. He reached inside and pulled out a familiar rectangular object. My custom-bound leather portfolio. The ivory cardstock pages containing 3 weeks of grueling, meticulous market analysis. My predictive models. My proprietary algorithms. the very blueprint of my professional worth. He handed it to the receptionist. She took the binder, glancing down at the shredder concealed beneath her workstation. She fed the leather edge into the industrial machine. The camera captured the slight vibration of her desk as the heavy-duty blades caught the material. I stood frozen in Julian's office, watching the physical manifestation of my intellect being ripped into unreadable confetti. She did the same with the silver USB drive, dropping it onto the floor and crushing the casing beneath the heel of her shoe. She effectively erased your resume from our local servers, Julian continued, his tone clinical, but laced with a simmering disgust. She marked you as a voluntary no-show, bypassing the standard alert protocols that would have flagged your absence to my executive team. Your father did not just drug you, Harper. He systematically dismantled your identity within this company. The silence in the corner office was profound, broken only by the faint, distant hum of city traffic dozens of floors below. The footage looped, starting over from the moment my father walked through the revolving doors. I felt a cold, phantom ache radiating from my chest. It was the death of a deeply buried hope. The naive, persistent child inside me had always believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved my undeniable value, my parents would eventually choose me. That illusion was now shredded, destroyed just as thoroughly as the portfolio in the video. I did not avert my gaze. I forced myself to watch the loop again, burning the image of my father's transactional smile into my memory. It was the armor I needed to survive what came next. Julian stood next to me, analyzing my reaction. He was watching for tears. He was looking for a breakdown, a sign of emotional fragility that would disqualify me from operating at the highest levels of his firm. I gave him nothing. My posture remained rigid, my jaw locked. "This is the currency my family trades in, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of the panic that had haunted my morning. They removed the obstacles standing in my sister's path, regardless of the collateral damage. I and the collateral damage. Julian turned away from the wall monitor, his dark eyes studying my composed exterior. A flicker of genuine respect softened the hard, predatory lines of his face. "Most people would be screaming right now," he observed softly, "or calling a lawyer." "I will have plenty of time for lawyers," I replied, holding his gaze. "Right now, I need to understand the rest of the equation. You said Vanessa did not get the job. If my father cleared the runway for her, why did she fail?" Julian walked over to his black walnut desk. He picked up a sleek silver tablet and tapped the glass screen, bringing a new file to life. The security footage on the wall monitor vanished, replaced by a digital slide deck. My slide deck. The title page bore Vanguard's corporate logo above the specific algorithmic market strategy I had spent 80 hours refining. "Let us talk about your sister," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, ringing with an icy, dangerous anticipation. Because the bribery in my lobby was only the preamble. The real crime happened inside my boardroom at 10 o'clock this morning. Julian tapped the glass screen of his silver tablet. The wall monitor shifted. The black and white security feed disappeared. In its place, a crisp, high-definition title slide illuminated the darkened office. The Vanguard Innovations logo sat in the top right corner. Beneath it, bold lettering spelled out the third quarter market capture strategy. And right at the bottom, centered in pristine 12-point font, was my sister's name, Vanessa. I stared at the screen. A profound, chilling sensation washed over my skin. This was the blueprint I had spent 3 grueling weeks building. I recognized the specific hex codes I had selected for the color palette. I recognized the custom typography. I knew every single data point hidden within those slides because I had mined them from Vanguard's public financial disclosures late into the night while Vanessa slept down the hall. My father had paid $5,000 to shred the physical copies in the lobby, but Vanessa had possessed the sheer audacity to upload my digital backup file directly into the Vanguard presentation system. "She brought this into my boardroom at 10 o'clock this morning," Julian said. His voice was a low, steady hum filling the vast office. She walked in wearing an expensive ivory suit, projecting the kind of unearned confidence that usually belongs to heirs and con artists. She stood at the head of a long glass table, surrounded by my senior executive team, and for the first 5 minutes, she put on quite a show. I kept my eyes fixed on the monitor. I could picture the scene with painful clarity. Vanessa possessed a dangerous kind of charisma. It was a shallow, magnetic pull that our parents had cultivated and rewarded her entire life. She knew how to make eye contact. She knew when to deploy a warm, practiced smile. She spoke in broad, sweeping strokes, Julian continued. He began pacing slowly behind his walnut desk. She talked about brand synergy. She talked about holistic customer alignment and paradigm shifts in the tech sector. My board members were initially charmed. People are naturally drawn to a confident delivery. They nodded along as she clicked through your introductory slides, claiming your architectural market vision as her own brilliant epiphany. Julian stopped pacing. He leaned against the edge of his desk, folding his arms. But I do not run a public relations firm, Harper. I run a data-driven technology empire. I do not care about holistic alignment. I care about the underlying mathematics of consumer behavior. I care about numbers. And while my board was busy smiling at your sister, I was busy reading the actual data on the screen. He picked up his tablet and swiped his finger across the glass. The wall monitor advanced to slide 4. It was the most complex visualization in the entire deck. A dense, intricate scatterplot detailing predictive churn rates against customer acquisition cost ratios over a volatile 36-month period. It was a brutal, honest assessment of Vanguard's current market vulnerabilities. It required a deep, fundamental understanding of predictive analytics to even read, much less explain. I looked at this slide, Julian said softly, his dark eyes narrowing as he recalled the moment. And I experienced a very specific moment of cognitive dissonance. The woman, standing at the front of the room, speaking in fluffy corporate buzzwords, did not match the ruthless surgical intellect required to build this regression model. The voice did not match the math. I knew what he was going to say next. I felt the first real spark of vindication flare in my chest. I have a photographic memory for talent, Julian stated. It is the only reason my company dominates this sector. During the preliminary interview rounds last month, I reviewed over 400 digital audits submitted by the initial applicant pool. Your audit stood out. You have a very distinct analytical signature, Harper. The way you cluster your data sets, the specific syntax you use to label your variables, it is a digital watermark, a fingerprint of your intellect. Julian pointed a finger at the glowing wall monitor. I looked at slide 4, and I saw your fingerprint. I recognized the exact methodology from your round 1 submissions. I knew instantly that the woman wearing the ivory suit was presenting stolen intellectual property. He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle into the quiet room. So I decided to test my theory, Julian said, a dark, predatory amusement dancing in his tone. I interrupted her practiced monologue. I asked her to pause on slide 4. I asked her a very simple technical question. I requested that she walk the board through the standard deviation of the acquisition cost ratio and explain how she accounted for the third quarter market friction. I let out a slow breath. Vanessa did not know what standard deviation meant. She had failed basic college algebra twice before my father paid a private tutor to essentially take the class for her. What did she do? I asked, my voice steady but laced with a sharp underlying curiosity. She froze, Julian replied. The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, clinical disdain. The color drained from her cheeks. The practiced smile collapsed. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. She tried to pivot. She tried to deploy another buzzword. She told me she preferred to focus on the overarching narrative rather than getting bogged down in the tedious spreadsheet metrics. Julian shook his head, a gesture of pure corporate disgust. I do not tolerate deflection in my boardroom. I pressed her. I demanded the math. I asked her to define the variables on the very chart she claimed to have spent weeks creating. She stood in front of 7 senior executives, and she crumbled. She stammered. She lost her breath. The silence in that room was deafening. My board members shifted in their seats, realizing they were watching an imposter drown in stolen waters. "She bombed," Julian stated. The finality in his voice was absolute. It was the fastest interview termination in the history of Vanguard Innovations. I dismissed her after 22 minutes. I watched her pack up her bag with shaking hands and flee the room. I absorbed the image. My sister, the golden child, the untouchable favorite, had finally encountered a wall my father could not bribe her way over. She had stepped out of the protective bubble of our suburban home and into a ruthless meritocracy. The real world did not care about her charm. The real world demanded competence, and she had none to offer. But her failure was only half the equation, Julian continued. He walked back around his desk. I knew she had committed corporate espionage. I knew she had plagiarized your unique methodology. What I did not know was why you allowed it to happen. Why Harper, the brilliant architect of this strategy, simply vanished and let a thief walk into my building. He set the tablet down on the walnut wood. So I locked myself in this office. I demanded the security logs from the ground floor. I pulled the visitor manifests. I traced your name. And I found the manual override entered by the front desk receptionist, marking you as a no-show. That anomaly led me to the lobby camera feeds. And that is when I watched your father purchase your absence. The entire narrative was now laid bare. The puzzle pieces locked together, forming a picture of breathtaking familial treachery and spectacular corporate failure. My parents had risked everything to secure a future for a daughter who lacked the basic foundation to sustain it. They had sacrificed my career on the altar of Vanessa's entitlement, and it had all been for nothing. I looked away from the monitor and met Julian Sterling's gaze. The chief executive officer was studying me again. He had laid out the crime. He had presented the evidence. Now he was waiting to see how the victim would respond. "She told me she crushed the interview," I said, a hollow, dry laugh escaping my throat. "I left her in my apartment less than an hour ago. She was holding designer shopping bags, celebrating her undeniable success. She told me you loved her big-picture energy." Julian did not smile. "Delusion is a powerful coping mechanism for the incompetent," he noted quietly. "Your sister will have to face reality very soon." He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. The analytical detachment in his posture shifted into something sharp and decisive. He had not brought me up to his corner suite just to offer a post-mortem on my sister's humiliation. He was a man who optimized every variable. I was the missing variable, and I was finally standing right in front of him. The shadow of a new conflict began to form in the quiet space between us. Julian's eyes locked onto mine, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "We have established the crime, Harper," Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, commanding register. "Now we need to discuss the consequence, because I do not let corporate thieves walk away clean, and I think you and I have some very specific business to conclude tonight." Julian remained leaning against the edge of his black walnut desk. He watched me with the calculating precision of a man who dealt in high-stakes acquisitions and hostile takeovers every single day. He had just presented me with undeniable proof of my own family orchestrating my professional ruin. He had shown me the footage of my father bribing his staff and the slides of my sister attempting to plagiarize my intellect. He was waiting to see if the weight of that betrayal would fracture my composure. It did not. The sedative my father had slipped into my espresso the night before was entirely gone from my system, replaced by a cold, sharp adrenaline. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the chief executive officer of Vanguard Innovations, and I simply nodded, acknowledging the data he had laid out before me. "You have a very rare psychological resilience, Harper," Julian observed. His tone was smooth, carrying a genuine thread of professional respect. I have watched seasoned executives crumble under far less pressure. I have seen vice presidents panic when a single quarterly projection misses the mark. You just watched your own blood relatives attempt to assassinate your career, and your pulse has not elevated a single beat. My pulse is fine, Mr. Sterling, I replied, keeping my posture straight and my shoulders squared. Panic is a useless metric. It does not change the past, and it does not secure the future. I came here today to address a discrepancy regarding my absence, and you have provided the exact variables I was missing. Julian smiled. It was a brief, sharp expression that transformed his intimidating features into something deeply formidable. He stood up straight, pushing himself off the edge of the desk. He walked over to the expansive floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the glittering grid of the Chicago skyline for a long moment before turning back to face me. I do not hire victims, Julian stated, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. I hire architects. I hire individuals who can look at a devastated landscape and figure out how to build a fortress on top of the rubble. Your sister walked into my boardroom and proved she was a hollow shell. She possessed the aesthetic of success, but lacked the foundational intelligence to sustain it. You built the foundation. You did the grueling, invisible labor required to map out our third quarter trajectory. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The vice president of marketing position is yours, Harper. Mid-six figures base salary, full executive benefits, a comprehensive stock options package that vests over the next 3 years. I want you running my division, and I want you starting on Monday morning. The words hung in the quiet air of the corner suite. A profound, defining victory settled into my bones. For years, my parents had tried to convince me that my relentless work ethic was a character flaw. They had framed my dedication as an inconvenience, a stubborn refusal to fall in line behind Vanessa's unearned spotlight. They had actively tried to sabotage my ascent because my competence threatened their manufactured narrative. But standing in this office, securing a top-tier executive role at one of the most ruthless technology firms in the country, I realized their opinions were entirely irrelevant. My father could not bribe away my intellect. My sister could not plagiarize my resilience. I accept the position, I said, my voice steady and unwavering. I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Sterling. You will have my revised onboarding strategy in your inbox by Sunday evening. Julian nodded, satisfied with the seamless transaction. Excellent. Now that we have concluded the hiring process, we need to address the security breach that occurred in my lobby. Vanguard Innovations operates on a strict code of ethics. I do not tolerate corporate espionage, and I certainly do not tolerate external parties bribing my employees to manipulate our internal systems. He walked over to his console and picked up his silver tablet. The receptionist who accepted your father's envelope has already been terminated, Julian explained, tapping the screen. Security escorted her out of the building 30 minutes before you arrived. She surrendered the $5,000 in cash, which has been logged as evidence. Our legal department is currently drafting a formal police report. We take the destruction of proprietary applicant data very seriously. I listened to the swift, decisive corporate justice being enacted. Vanguard was moving to protect its own interests, but the ripple effects were going to hit my family with devastating force. My father was a man who worshipped his public reputation. He served on the boards of local charities. He golfed with politicians and bank managers at his exclusive suburban country club. His entire identity was built on the projection of impeccable moral authority and generational wealth. Facing criminal charges for corporate bribery would not just embarrass him, it would dismantle the hollow kingdom he had spent his entire life building. And then there is your sister, Julian added, his dark eyes narrowing. She presented stolen intellectual property to a board of directors during a formal corporate interview. That is a clear violation of state and federal business statutes. Vanguard has every right to pursue civil damages for the attempted fraud. He set the tablet down and looked at me, tilting his head slightly. The corporate machinery is already in motion, Harper. but I recognize that these are your relatives. Before I unleash my legal team, I want to know how you intend to handle the personal fallout. Where are they right now?" I let out a slow, measured breath. I pictured the text messages my mother had sent earlier that week, the frantic planning and the expensive reservations. I pictured Vanessa standing in my kitchen an hour ago, swinging her designer shopping bags and vibrating with the thrill of her stolen triumph. "They are celebrating," I told him, the bitter irony of the situation coating my words. My parents booked the private dining room at the Capitol Grill downtown. It is a massive dinner party. They invited our extended relatives, my father's business associates, and half the members of their country club. They are hosting a victory dinner for Vanessa tonight. They believe she secured the vice president role, and they want to ensure all of Chicago high society is there to witness her success. Julian stood perfectly still. The corners of his mouth twitched, a silent acknowledgement of the staggering hubris required to throw a victory party for a job you had not actually won. "They are toasting a lie," I continued, my voice growing colder with every word. "My father is likely ordering expensive champagne right now, playing the role of the proud patriarch. They think they successfully eliminated me from the equation. They think I am sitting alone in my apartment, nursing a mysterious illness, too weak and defeated to challenge their narrative." Julian adjusted the cuffs of his pristine white shirt. He looked at the antique clock sitting on his desk. It was approaching 7 in the evening. The dinner service downtown would be in full swing. The guests would be seated. The toasts would be underway. "I have spent the last 3 weeks reviewing financial audits and interviewing candidates," Julian said softly. His voice carried a dangerous, predatory rhythm. "I have not stepped out of this building for a proper meal in days, and I find that I have a sudden, undeniable craving for a very expensive steak." I looked at him, recognizing the exact brand of tactical ruthlessness that made him such a feared executive. He was not just offering to support his new vice president. He was recognizing a strategic opportunity to confront the individuals who had attempted to defraud his company, and he wanted to execute that confrontation on their own stage. "You want to crash the celebration?" I stated, a dark sense of anticipation taking root in my chest. Julian picked up his suit jacket from the back of his leather chair and slipped it on, adjusting the lapels with sharp, precise movements. "I believe in direct communication, Harper. Your father felt comfortable walking into my building and corrupting my staff. Your sister felt comfortable walking into my boardroom and insulting my intelligence. It is only appropriate that I return the favor and introduce myself to their distinguished guests." He picked up a thick manila folder resting near his keyboard. I recognized the Vanguard legal seal stamped on the front cover. It contained the high-definition prints of the security footage, the photographic proof of the bribe, and the documentation of the shredded portfolio. It was a paper trail of absolute destruction. "Are you ready to introduce your new employer to your family?" Julian asked, holding the folder at his side. I looked at the heavy double doors leading out of the corner suite. The scared, obedient daughter who had walked into that family home the night before was gone. She had died the moment that drugged espresso hit her bloodstream. I was walking out of this office as a top-tier executive, backed by the full power of a Silicon Valley titan, and I was holding the match that would burn their empire to the ground. "I am ready," I replied. We walked out of the suite together. The executive floor was silent, the dim evening lighting casting long shadows across the slate carpet. We stepped into the chrome elevator, and the doors glided shut, sealing us in. As the car plummeted toward the ground floor, the mechanical hum of the descent matched the steady, relentless thrumming of my pulse. We exited the Vanguard building and stepped out into the crisp autumn night. The Chicago air was sharp, carrying the scent of rain and city exhaust. A sleek black town car was waiting idling at the curb. Julian's driver opened the rear door. We climbed inside, the heavy doors thudding shut, insulating us in a cocoon of dark leather and tinted glass. "The Capitol Grill," Julian instructed the driver. The town car pulled away from the curb, merging into the glowing stream of downtown traffic. I watched the city lights smear across the window glass. We were heading straight into the heart of my family's manufactured kingdom. The trap was set, the evidence was secured, and the final curtain was about to fall on their perfect illusion. The ride through the downtown Chicago streets felt like moving through a vacuum. Sitting in the back of the sleek town car next to Julian Sterling, I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. The autumn rain had started to fall, slicking the pavement and casting long neon reflections across the asphalt. I listened to the rhythmic thrum of the tires. For 29 years, my heart would have been pounding with anxiety at the thought of defying my father. He had spent my entire life cultivating an aura of untouchable authority. He trained me to seek his approval and fear his disappointment. But sitting in that leather seat, armed with undeniable proof of his treachery, the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, clinical anticipation. I was not a scared daughter returning to beg for a place at the table. I was an executive arriving to dismantle the board. The town car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Capitol Grill. The restaurant was a fortress of old-world luxury, known for its mahogany paneling, dry-aged steaks, and a clientele consisting of the city's financial elite. It was the exact venue my father would choose to stage a victory. He did not just want to celebrate Vanessa. He needed an audience. He needed his country club peers, his golf partners, and our extended relatives to witness his daughter ascending to the ranks of a Silicon Valley powerhouse. He needed them to validate the illusion he had spent decades funding. Julian's driver opened my door. The chill of the night air bit through my tailored trench coat, but I welcomed the sharp sensation. Julian stepped out from the other side, buttoning his suit jacket with a precise, fluid motion. We walked through the polished brass doors and stepped into the bustling reception area. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive cigars, seared meat, and rich red wine. The low hum of affluent conversation filled the room. I approached the maitre d' at the front desk. "The Richard reservation," I said, keeping my voice even. The host offered a polite nod, checking his leather-bound ledger. "Of course. They are in the private wine room in the back. Right this way." I raised a hand, stopping him from stepping out from behind his podium. "We know the way. Thank you." Julian and I walked through the main dining room, navigating the labyrinth of white linen tables. My gaze remained fixed on the heavy oak doors at the far end of the corridor. The private wine room was an exclusive enclave reserved for high-profile celebrations. As we approached the closed doors, the sound of laughter and clinking crystal drifted into the hallway. I paused, pressing my hand flat against the cool wood of the door. I could hear my father's booming, theatrical voice projecting across the room. He was giving a toast. To Vanessa, my father projected, his tone dripping with manufactured pride. When Vanguard Innovations announced they were coming to Chicago, they said they were looking for a visionary. They said they wanted someone who could redefine the market. They interviewed hundreds of candidates, but they only needed to look at one. Today, she walked into their boardroom and showed them what true brilliance looks like. To the new vice president of marketing. "Hear, hear," a chorus of voices echoed. The sound of delicate crystal toasting followed. They were drinking to a phantom. They were celebrating a heist that had ended in spectacular failure. The sheer audacity of his speech, the calculated erasure of my existence, settled deep into my bones. I looked at Julian. His expression was a mask of cold, predatory calm. He gave me a single, slow nod. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. The hinges let out a soft groan, but my entrance was jarring enough to sever the conversation instantly. The private dining room was dripping with opulence. Walls of vintage wine bottles encased the space. A grand rectangular table occupied the center, surrounded by 24 guests. My aunts and uncles sat alongside my father's wealthy business associates. At the head of the table sat Vanessa. She had changed out of her ivory interview suit and was now wearing a stunning emerald silk dress. A fresh glass of champagne rested in her hand. My mother sat to her right, wearing her signature pearls and a beaming, triumphant smile. My father stood at the opposite end of the table, still holding his glass of Dom Perignon in the air. The smile fell from my mother's face the second she saw me. Her hand trembled, spilling a drop of champagne onto the pristine white tablecloth. Vanessa stiffened, her eyes darting toward the doorway with a flash of genuine panic. The extended family and the country club friends fell silent, confused by the sudden drop in temperature. I stepped into the room, letting the heavy oak doors swing shut behind me. I did not take off my trench coat. I simply stood there, letting my presence disrupt their carefully curated fantasy. "Harper," my father said. He recovered his composure with the speed of a seasoned politician. He lowered his glass and plastered a patronizing, sorrowful look across his features. "You finally woke up. We were so worried about you." He walked around the edge of the table, projecting his voice so the entire room could hear his fabricated sympathy. "It is a terrible shame you caught that stomach bug last night. I know how hard you prepared for today. But the corporate world moves fast, sweetheart. You just could not handle the pressure this morning." He reached out, intending to place a comforting, paternal hand on my shoulder. He wanted to frame me as the weak, sickly sibling in front of his peers, reinforcing the lie that I had buckled under the weight of my own ambition. "She handled the pressure perfectly, Richard." The voice did not belong to me. It came from the shadows of the hallway behind me. Julian Sterling pushed the oak doors open again and stepped fully into the light of the crystal chandelier. The shift in the room was tectonic. Half of the men sitting at that table were executives in the Chicago financial sector. They read the Wall Street Journal. They followed market acquisitions. They knew exactly who the man in the midnight blue suit was. A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed around the table. One of my father's banking friends actually dropped his fork, the silver clattering loudly against his porcelain plate. My father stopped dead in his tracks, his outstretched hand freezing in midair. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His eyes widened, failing to comprehend how the billionaire chief executive officer of Vanguard Innovations had just walked into his private family dinner. Vanessa let out a small, strangled gasp. She pressed her hands against the edge of the mahogany table, pushing her chair back as if she wanted to flee. But she was trapped between the wall of wine bottles and her own terrified mother. Julian did not offer a polite greeting. He did not acknowledge the wealthy guests or the expensive bottles of wine. He walked past me, his leather shoes making no sound against the thick carpet, and moved directly to the center of the long table. He possessed an aura of quiet, devastating authority that commanded absolute silence. He stopped right next to the silver bucket, chilling the $300 bottle of Dom Perignon. He looked at my father. Richard stood frozen, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. The facade of the proud patriarch was crumbling by the second, exposing the desperate, cornered fraud underneath. Julian reached into the interior pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew the thick manila folder. The Vanguard legal seal was stamped boldly across the front cover. With a flick of his wrist, Julian tossed the folder onto the table. It landed with a heavy, definitive smack. The force of the impact knocked the brass clasp open. High-definition, glossy photographs spilled out across the white linen tablecloth, sliding directly toward my father's golf buddies and my extended relatives. They were the security prints from the lobby. The images were undeniable. There was my father, captured in stark clarity, sliding the thick white envelope of cash across the marble reception desk. There was the receptionist, looking nervously over her shoulder. And there was the final, damning sequence, showing my custom leather portfolio being fed directly into the industrial shredder. The banking executive sitting nearest to the photos leaned forward, his eyes scanning the images. He looked up at my father, his expression twisting from confusion into sheer, unadulterated disgust. Julian rested his hands on the back of an empty leather chair. He tilted his head, his dark eyes locking onto my father with the precision of a sniper. "I believe you dropped this, Richard," Julian said, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the photos, then at his friends, then at me. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, as every single person in that room realized they were not attending a victory celebration. They were attending an execution. The silence stretching across the private dining room was profound. You could hear the subtle shift of ice melting in the crystal water glasses. You could hear the shallow, terrified breathing of the guests seated around the mahogany table. My father stared at the glossy security photographs scattered across the white linen, his mind struggling to process the visual proof of his own destruction. "What is the meaning of this?" my father stammered. His voice lacked its usual booming resonance. It was thin, reedy, and laced with a rising panic. He looked up at Julian Sterling, attempting to summon a mask of righteous indignation, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. "This is a private family event, Mr. Sterling. You cannot just walk in here and throw baseless accusations around." Julian did not flinch. He remained standing near the silver champagne bucket, projecting the calm, lethal patience of a predator watching its prey bleed out. "There is nothing baseless about a high-definition security feed, Richard," Julian replied. His tone was smooth and clinical. "I do not deal in accusations. I deal in data. The receptionist you bribed surrendered the $5,000 in cash 30 minutes ago. She signed a sworn affidavit detailing your transaction. She confessed to destroying proprietary applicant materials at your direct instruction." A low murmur rippled through the room. The affluent guests, the bank managers, and the country club executives began pulling away from the table. They recognized the scent of a sinking ship. In their world, reputation was currency, and my father's currency had just plummeted to zero. The man sitting to my father's left, a senior partner at a local law firm, quietly pushed his chair back and stood up, distancing himself from the blast radius. "My legal team filed a formal police report an hour ago," Julian continued, ignoring the shifting crowd. "We are pressing criminal charges for corporate bribery and evidence tampering. The authorities are currently securing a warrant. I expect they will be visiting your suburban home very soon." My father sank into his chair. His chest heaved. The pristine image he had spent his entire life cultivating the image of, the successful, infallible patriarch, was dissolving before his eyes. He looked at the faces of his peers, searching for an ally, but he found only disgust and quiet judgment. But Julian was not finished. He turned his attention to the head of the table. Vanessa was still pressed against the back of her chair, her emerald silk dress looking suddenly out of place on a woman shrinking in terror. She had spent her life relying on her charm to escape consequences. The charm holds no weight against federal statutes. "And then there is the matter of your daughter," Julian said, his dark eyes locking onto Vanessa. "She entered my boardroom this morning and presented a highly complex market capture strategy. She claimed it was her own original work." Vanessa opened her mouth, her lips trembling, but she could not form a single word. "That strategy belonged to the candidate you drugged," Julian stated, his voice ringing with a sharp, undeniable clarity. "That is a textbook definition of intellectual property theft and corporate espionage. Vanguard Innovations will be pursuing maximum civil damages against you, Vanessa. We will seize whatever assets you possess to compensate for the attempted fraud." The illusion shattered. The golden child facade broke apart into 1,000 jagged pieces. Vanessa burst into tears. It was not the delicate, sympathetic crying she usually deployed to manipulate our parents. It was a chaotic, ugly sobbing fueled by genuine terror. She looked at Julian, then she looked at me, realizing for the first time in her life that I was not going to step in and save her. "I did not do it," Vanessa choked out, her voice cracking. She pointed a shaking finger directly at our father. "He told me to do it. He said Harper was in the way. He brought the presentation home and told me to memorize the slides. It was his idea." The loyalty among thieves vanished the moment the pressure was applied. My father flinched, staring at his favorite daughter in horror as she publicly threw him under the bus to save herself. The toxic bond they shared, built on my exclusion, was eating itself alive right in front of me. My mother pushed her chair back. She stood up, her face streaked with tears, and walked around the table toward me. She reached out with trembling hands, intending to grab my arm. "Harper, please," my mother begged. Her voice was a desperate, high-pitched whisper. "You have to stop this. You have to talk to him. We are your family. You cannot let him send your father to prison. You cannot let him ruin your sister. Please, fix this." I looked at the woman who had watched me collapse on her dining room floor. I remembered the cold, detached way she had picked up my empty coffee mug, prioritizing the concealment of a crime over the safety of her own child. I stepped back, moving permanently out of her reach. "You stopped being my family the moment you poured that espresso," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of anger, devoid of sorrow. I felt nothing but a profound, liberating emptiness. "I am not your fixer anymore, Mom. You chose Vanessa. You chose this outcome. Now you get to live with it." I turned my back on her. I did not look at my father sobbing into his hands or my sister weeping into the fine linen tablecloth. I looked at Julian Sterling. "Harper is the new vice president of marketing at Vanguard Innovations," Julian announced to the stunned room. His words cut through the sounds of my family's despair. "And let me make one thing very clear to everyone sitting at this table. My company protects its executives. If anyone in this room attempts to contact her, harass her, or interfere with her career in any capacity, you will face the full weight of my legal department." Julian gave me a single nod. Our business here was concluded. We turned and walked out of the private wine room. I did not look back. We walked down the long corridor, past the maitre d' desk, and pushed through the heavy brass doors of the restaurant. We stepped out into the cool, rain-washed Chicago night. The air tasted like freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp scent of the city. The heavy, invisible chain I had been dragging around for 29 years. The constant need for parental approval, the desperate desire to be seen, had finally snapped. Julian stood beside me on the pavement. The town car pulled up to the curb. He opened the rear door for me. "I will see you on Monday morning, Vice President," Julian said, a genuine smile softening his features. "I will be there," I replied. I got into the car and watched the city lights blur past the window as I rode toward my new life. It has been 6 months since that night at the Capitol Grill. The fallout was swift and devastating. My father was formally indicted on charges of corporate bribery. The scandal made the front page of the Chicago Tribune business section. His country club revoked his membership, and his wealthy friends severed all ties. He is currently facing potential jail time and crushing legal fees. My parents were forced to sell that sprawling suburban house just to cover their defense attorneys. Vanessa is facing a massive civil lawsuit from Vanguard Innovations. She had to declare bankruptcy. Without my father's money to subsidize her lifestyle, she is currently working a minimum wage retail job, learning for the first time what it actually means to earn a living. As for me, I'm thriving. I rebuilt the marketing division at Vanguard. I work long hours, but the work is recognized, rewarded, and respected. I bought a new condo overlooking the lake, and I filled it with art and books that I love. I learned the hardest lesson a person can learn. Blood does not make a family. Blood just provides a biological connection. True family is built on respect, on showing up, and on protecting one another. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones you need the most protection from. You do not owe your abusers loyalty just because you share a last name. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to build your own empire and leave them in the dust. If you are listening to this right now and you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to know something. You are not crazy, you are not too sensitive, and you are certainly not broken. You are the architect of your own life. Stop handing the blueprints to people who only want to tear you down. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If my story gave you the courage to set a boundary in your own life, please hit that like button and subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to save your own future? Let me know. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more stories about finding your strength, check out the videos linked in the description. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, your worth is undeniable. Although the profound betrayal executed by those who are supposed to protect and nurture you can feel like a devastating blow that shatters your foundational understanding of love and loyalty, the ultimate lesson embedded in this harrowing ordeal is that your inherent worth, your meticulously cultivated intellect, and your unyielding resilience are not assets that can be stolen, shredded, or suppressed by toxic family members who desperately attempt to dim your light to artificially illuminate someone else, demonstrating with absolute clarity that when you finally summon the courage to sever the invisible, suffocating chains of familial obligation and refuse to continuously sacrifice your own genuinely deserved future on the altar of your sister's entitlement or your parents' manufactured illusions, you do not just survive the sabotage, but you actively reclaim your agency, proving to yourself and to the world that biological connections do not inherently constitute a true family, especially when those connections are weaponized to orchestrate your professional and emotional ruin without a single shred of remorse or basic human decency, ultimately leading you to the empowering realization that true liberation begins the exact moment you stop seeking validation from those who are committed to misunderstanding your value, and instead step boldly into the formidable, authentic version of yourself who commands respect, demands accountability, and builds an undeniable empire on the very ashes of their deceit by fiercely protecting your boundaries and unapologetically trusting the brilliant mind you have relentlessly cultivated, which is a journey of reclaiming your power that I hope resonates deeply with you and inspires your own healing. So please remember to like, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments below if you found strength in this narrative about overcoming profound adversity and finding true peace. And thank you for watching Sophia Told Stories.